Hey everyone, it's Ed with Slow Car Fix, and today I'm going to talk about why my Corvair blew up last year with a brand new engine in it, and I'm going to show you what I'm putting in it. Okay, so my 66 Corvair Corsa that I bought last year, it's a car that I've known about for a long time and I've always really liked, and finally had the chance to buy it last year. I was all excited because the previous owner had spent a bunch of money and had the engine rebuilt, trans and diff rebuilt, and the front end rebuilt, and a whole bunch of mechanical work. It was pretty much mechanically sorted, ran reasonably well, and that was all good. I put about 3,000 miles on it. I bought it maybe in the spring, and then in November, end of last year, I was going to visit my son, and I got a noise. It wasn't a good noise. That noise subsequently cost a lot of money. Okay, before I get carried away here, let me just say, I said this in my last bunch of videos about this car, but I have no ill feelings towards the guy I bought it from. He sold me what he thought was a great car, and it is a really good car. Just mechanically, he had spent a pile of money to get it sorted, and unfortunately, whoever rebuilt the engine, amateur kind of stuff, and that then subsequently made that all the money that he spent was for nothing, and pretty much everything that he had spent money on in the engine, unfortunately, had to be replaced. It's not his fault. I'm absolutely okay with it. It's old car stuff. It is what it is. It's unfortunate. It means that I'm in the car more than I wanted to be, but I really like the car, so it doesn't really matter. And a friend of mine told me one time that you always get your money back. Sometimes you just have to wait longer. But that being said, it's going to be a very mechanically sorted car, so I'm not really that worried about it. I don't ever plan on selling it, not for a long time anyway. So let me show you what the noise was. So initially there was a squeak, and I described it as a squeak, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And then I thought for a minute, after the winter, I thought that maybe I got away easy. So why I thought I got away easy? The squeak was a problem, but it wasn't a big problem. The bigger problems we found later. This is a Corvair pushrod. On a Corvair pushrod, there is an oiling hole on one end only. If you put these in backwards, these are supposed to, the oiling hole is to oil the rockers. If you put that in backwards, the rocker isn't going to get sufficient oil. So what had happened was, we thought it was one, but it actually turned out to be many push rods were in backwards. And then this is the rocker arm, not the rocker arm, but this is a rocker arm. And this is the ball that sits inside. So that ball goes in here, and your nut, this sits on your rocker arm stud, and then this pushes the push rod. That being said, I'm holding it backwards. This pushes the push rod, or lifters push the push rods, I should say, because the cam turns, pushes the lifters, pushes the push rods move the rocker opens and closes the valve. That's about as basic as I can explain that. But this guy here was moving around in here with no oil. So by the time I was driving to Ottawa, which is about 4 hours away from here, and at highway speeds, by the time I got there, it was squeaking and making this awful valve train clatter, because the majority of the valve train, or the rocker arms, were dry, because the 3 of the push rods were in backwards, 3 or 4, I think Lloyd said. So, but this one in particular was a problem, and it blued, this isn't the rocker, but it blued a rocker on the inside from heat and wore this ball to like nothing, which then subsequently puts metal through the oil, which isn't the end of the world because it's mostly localized and you can clean out around the rocker arm, clean out the stud, and change the oil and flush it and hope that you didn't ruin your bearings and everything else. However, in this engine, it caused us to look further. Okay, so ultimately, Cole's notes, rocker ball squeak, alerted me that there was a problem, caused me to trailer it home. It still ran, but was very noisy. Upon further inspection, trying to see if I could get away with just flushing the block and changing the rocker ball and the rocker arms, found that there was a lot more metal in the oil than one would like, and a lot of it was aluminum, which doesn't make sense because those rocker arms are not aluminum. Cam gear is aluminum. Upon further inspection, decided the engine was going to come down. Tore it down. I didn't tear it down. Let me just preface this with, I did none of this. I've already been asked, and I've only had this engine home for one night, and I've been asked who rebuilt it. A friend of mine from the Corvair Club rebuilt it. He is a machinist. His son has a machine shop, and they have been, they're Corvair enthusiasts. They've had Corvairs. Lloyd has had Corvair since the 70s, I think, and he's done this lots of times. He's very experienced. However, he's a private individual. He's not a public shop. I don't know that he's looking for a whole bunch of work rebuilding engines. So if you're looking to ask me on recommendations on who to rebuild your engine, contact your local club and see who's available that has a lot of engine experience. However, be sure that they've done it before and not just rebuilt a small block Chevy before, but rebuilt specifically Corvair engines before with great success rate. Because I don't know who rebuilt this engine that came in the car, but they obviously, judging by the silicone everywhere and all the other stuff that I found, they're not experienced with Corvair air-cooled engines on rebuilds. Okay, back to the engine. This will come up all the time. People ask, did I put deep seats in? Did it drop a valve seat? No, it didn't drop a valve seat. I've owned a lot of these cars. I've owned, I don't know, 35 or 36 of these cars. Probably a bunch of them with 140s and 140 horsepower engine, 4 carburetors. I've had a turbo. I've never dropped a valve seat on stock engines. Never dropped a valve seat. I live in Canada, which makes a big difference. I run my lower shrouds, which is just a preference, but I also feel that it helps the engine cool more uniformly. That's up for debate. A lot of people argue about that. But I like to run it. I also like Corvair heat. So what happens is, with 140s, is these valve seats will pop. They'll pop out of the cylinder head, and they will end up jamming themselves into the piston or in between the valve and the, it just makes it a mess. I'm in Canada. Doesn't get that hot here. It's not Arizona. I also don't sit in traffic a lot. I don't race the car. I don't do anything like that. I don't feel that in my use case, it's worth the money for the valve seats. That being said, if I drop a valve seat tomorrow, the only person to blame is myself, and I will use probably this set of heads, get them cleaned up, get deep seats put in, swap the heads, and if I damage a piston, well, I guess I'm swapping a piston too. I'm not worried about it. I really am just not worried about it. It's a lot easier if you're in the States. If you're in the States, there's a lot of machine shops that are aviation guys that build Corvair engines for airplanes. There's some racing guys that specialize in machining for deep valve seats. For me to send my heads to the States and get them done and get them sent back, it's not cost effective. It's a lot of money. These engines aren't cheap. They're not cheap in general, and they're certainly not cheap when you start throwing $1,000 US into valve seats and then trying to spend probably the same amount to ship them and the exchange rate. These were the heads that were on the rebuilt engine. We elected not to use them because they had a few funny things that Lloyd didn't like. There's an excess pitting in the combustion chamber, particularly around the valve seats. So with it being a 140 and 140s being prone to dropping valve seats, decided it wasn't a good idea to run these heads without putting in deep seats or something like that. However, the heads that were on the, or some sort of combination of the heads that were on the rebuilt engine and the heads that were on the original engine, we came up with a set of heads that that were more than usable. Okay, so this is the 140 that's going in the car. It's matching numbers to the car. It's the correct date code. It's an RB Corsa block for early 66, which is what that car is. It is the one that came out of this car. It's the one that was born with this car. Lloyd's already done a bunch of work on it. He's had it running several times. Now it's time to get it in the car and get some load on it and you know, run it for a few hundred miles and then change the oil and then run it for a little longer and then change the oil and so on. I went with a new GM cam from Clark's. Went with new lifters, new valve springs, new valves, new bearings. The one thing we were able to reuse from this was the Clark's full fin cylinders that they had bought. So we were able to reuse those. That's good. But it's been gone through. And the advantage of using Lloyd for this, and I didn't know about this at the time, is he is very methodical, very organized, and provided me with step-by-step measurements of everywhere on the crankshaft for both the engine that what he found when he took it apart and what is in this new one. He did plastic gauge measurements, all the stud measurements. This is the procedure he went through and checked off everything that he did. Very, very detailed. It's a lot of stuff. This is all the rod measurements. He did whatever he had to do. If he bored the rods or just honed them, I'm not sure. But all the measurements are all within spec. The specs are up there. This is connecting rod weights. So he weighed them, which is interesting. All stuff that I would never do, but I'm glad he did. Clean the rods, check for straightness on granite, clean and deburr the large end using file and emery paper on granite, hone the big end, measure big end of rods and document, weigh pistons, look for anomalies. Like it's extremely detail oriented. What is this? This is the cylinder bore measurements that he measured. They were new Clark cylinders, but he still ended up running a hone through them and removed some of the glaze that was on them. There's a bit of glaze on them from that previous engine not being proper. So what did he do? Pistons from the rebuilt motor. So he was able to use, they were forged pistons, I'm pretty sure. New rings, Hastings Molly rings, 30 over. It's 30 over pistons. New Clark's valves, headbore measurements, valve guide and headbore measurements, valve guide to stem measurements, a valve spring worksheet for all the valve. They're all new valves, but he documented if he had to shim anything. Just very thorough. He ran a tap and through everything, every shroud bolt on the engine. He had to helicoil something, 3/8/24. Had to remove some broken studs. A lot of stuff. Yeah, a lot of stuff. So anyways, very detailed. I was very fortunate that he did that. Stack of receipts. Also, I will save you the trouble. I don't care to divulge how much this cost. I will say that you could buy a lot of LS engines, used LS engines, or rebuild a couple of small block Chevys for what it costs to rebuild correctly Corvair engine. Especially in Canada when everything has to come from the States and you have to pay shipping and brokerage and all this other crap. And then the exchange rate. So Corvair engines are very expensive. They're cheap cars, relatively cheap cars, but the engines are very expensive. So just be mindful of that. If you're purchasing a Corvair, make sure you got a good one. Sometimes, even when you think you've got a good one, sometimes it works out that you still have to do some work. And the thing is, you have to understand that it's an old car. Things happen. A lot of hands working on these things over the years. And sometimes you run into these kind of things. Anyways, I need to stop talking and I need to start working. So you can see I've got everything laid out here. The engine's over there. I just had those parts in here to show you. Drive shafts, parts, exhaust, car. I'm not going to do a step-by-step instructional on how to install this. The reason I'm not going to do a step-by-step instructional on how to install this is because I did a very, very thorough and detailed step-by-step instruction on how to remove it. It was an hour and 20-minute video. I will link it in the description. Watch that, because what I'm going to do now is the reverse of that. So I want to get the engine in the car. So rather than spending another extra amount of time to document the whole thing, please watch that other video. If you have any questions, shoot me in the comments about removal and install of engines. That's about all I can say about that. I'm going to get to work. Okay, a little under an hour and the engine's in. Doesn't mean anything. I got a lot of work to do. Let me show you what I'm working on. I'm going to do all the underneath stuff first and then do the top stuff last. I explained it in my last video, I'm pretty sure, about the systematic approach of doing things, working from one area to another. Efficiency makes a big difference. So let me show you what I got. So the engine is in. The mounts are attached, front and back. That's where it stops, really. I have a lot more to do. Lloyd did leave me a note and said that I may have to retorque the oil pan bolts and the valve cover bolts. Not a big deal. I just put some lube on my ball. I have to put this pivot back in. I did get a new one of these little end pieces, whatever this thing is. Because if you remember in the last video when I took this out, if you've watched it, this had a pin that kind of broke off in it. So fortunately, because Lloyd's a machinist and I'm busy working with my job and stuff, I sent this to him and got him to do it while he was doing it. And then he assembled the diff and trans all on it, so that way I could have this thing together pretty quick. So what do I got to do? I got to hook these guys up, but I will probably connect these first because when I connect these, if I tie these in for, see this whole thing moves, right? This whole swing arm, we'll call it. Let me, this swing arm moves in and out. It swings. If I put this here and tighten them down, I'm going to have a heck of a time trying to line this up. As it is, these are already kind of a bear. Usually what I do, and this will be no exception I'm sure, is I'll use like a ratchet strap and pull this inward. And you can see if I pull that inward, this guy here moves, right? So I can use that, as long as there's no bolts in it, I can put a pin in it and crank on it and use it as a leverage point to be able to move this whole thing. I can stick a jack under here. I can put a ratchet strap on here and ratchet it to the other side. There's all kinds of tricks to be able to make this connect to that, because as you can see, it doesn't just fall into place. So I've got that. These, in my opinion, those are the hardest part on a late model Corvair. I did think I mentioned in my last video that I match mark on this bolt because this is your rear wheel alignment. So I match marked it to make sure that I'm in this same spot, and then I'll torque that and then I'll drive it and see if I need to do an alignment or not. Yeah, lots of stuff going on, lots of stuff to do, lots of things to connect. One thing that's going to be fiddly and a pain in the butt to do myself is the clutch adjustment, because yeah, it's not going to be set up, so I'm going to have to I see that Lloyd took this off, ran a die on it, put some anti-seize on it, and that spins freely, so that'll help. But getting the friction point in the right spot is always, I always struggle with it anyway. So, look, I can see all my whatsits are in place, my what are they called? Heat baffles? Yeah, alright, enough talking, I gotta get back to work. Okay, it's the next day. I didn't get a full day on it yesterday because I started at about 1 p.m. because I was in the fall fair parade with my rampside truck. And then I had to go out for dinner. So I got pretty far though. I have a cricket joining me this morning. It's bright and squirrely. Everyone's still sleeping, everyone being my wife and dog. And I'm gonna try and get this wrapped up, so maybe I can get it out today. Let me show you where I got. Okay, so the engine is in. Exhaust is on. I think everything under here is done except for the lower shrouds. I gotta put them on. That's these guys. So I snugged up the valve covers a little bit because I got a little bit of oil, like Lloyd mentioned, that they were under torqued. This seems to be pretty good. It doesn't seem to be leaking. I'm gonna run it for, he's already changed the oil in it. I'm gonna run it for about 300 miles or so, and then I'll change the oil again. These guys, these strut rods, let me adjust my lighting. These strut rods are always a problem with lates. They're always hard to get. So what I did, and what I do, is I put the drive shaft in after. Well, that's something I have to do. I have to tighten them. I put my jack under here. I jack this up, and that brings them in. And then I use a ratchet strap, and I ratchet strap one side to the other. I just put it around the shock mount, and that pulls it in. And then you have to manipulate a whole bunch to be able to get those bolts to line up, because it's always wants to fight you with no load on the suspension. I changed my coupling. I've got my clutches all hooked up, probably not adjusted correctly. What is this? Looks like a brake line rubbing on my throttle thing. I'm gonna have to play with that. What else do I got going on here? Drive shafts are in, heater hoses are connected. I did notice that on the passenger side that it's melted through. I think I noticed that in the last video. and didn't buy a new one. So I'll have to do that later. In the there it is. See the holder. In the meantime, I just reinstalled it. I did notice that there was something was rubbing on the drive shaft at one time, so I got to keep an eye on that. I also see my antenna wires hanging here, so I got to tie that up. I think everything here is pretty good. I just got to do a once over. It's kind of nice that I left it for the night and came back out, because then I can do a once over and just check everything and make sure everything's cool. Yeah, I'm excited. I should be able to hear this thing run pretty shortly. I have all the stuff to do up top. A few little wiring odds and ends. I want to put my air grill on, all that sort of stuff. Okay, we're to the top side. I just gotta get the perimeter seal. It's easier to do it from the bottom, but there's certain spots that you can't get at from the bottom, like the center here, because there's a transmission in the way. So I just gotta work that around, make sure that's all on. Connect my, what is this thing? It goes to the crossover tube and goes to the, I think it's a vacuum gauge. Throttle shaft, wiring for the coil. This car has Petronics. I gotta hook that up. I don't know what this is. Oh, it goes to this oil pressure switch. I'm gonna have to look at some pictures to see, because this has a whole bunch of weird stuff. I gotta fix these wires that I cut the last time because they weren't correct. And I ran a new harness. I also have to, I don't know what that was. I gotta figure out, oh, that's a ground. I gotta figure out what this wiring all is. It's kind of a show. And then I gotta put my ground straps back on, you know, that sort of thing. And then fortunately fuel lines are all hooked up. There's not a lot of work to do on the top side. I was surprised when I thought about it last night that there's not really a lot left after the bottom side is done. I got the air grill on, as you can see. Lower shrouds are on. I need a new weather strip. I think I have that. I'm going to do the body paint on this car at some point. It's a really good car. It's worth doing. So I'm going to keep on working away at this stuff. So I've got everything hooked up except for the secondaries. The secondaries are just kind of floating. I've got everything wired, batteries in, nothing caught fire. I haven't tried to fire it yet, so I guess that's the next thing. I have primed the fuel pump. It's got, this thing has a, it's kind of neat. It's got a mechanical pump and an electric pump, and it's got a primer button underneath the, this is not stock by the way, underneath the dash. It's kind of neat for cold starts. You just prime it and then there's fuel there and it's not really a problem. So I've never installed one of those before. I've done lots of electric pumps, but never with a push button and simultaneously using a mechanical pump. So that's kind of interesting. Anyway, I'm going to give it a shot now and see if she'll fire up. And then I'm expecting my clutch adjustment's going to be way out of whack and whatever else. So let's see. Okay, it's idling. It's a little low. Has oil pressure, which is good. Pretty smooth. Quiet. Pretty smooth. Okay, it's running, and it's running pretty well. I'm happy about that. Idle's a little low, so I'll play with that. Also, once it's warmed up, I'll adjust it. Also, my clutch, it works. It's actually working reasonably well for not being adjusted, but the pedal's a little low. So I'm going to adjust that and bring the pedal up some. I have to think about that. It always takes me a minute to get my head around that. When you're pushing the pedal, it actually cantilevers the clutch fork and releases the clutch. So it takes me a minute to get my head around that and decide which way to adjust it, because invariably I always adjust it the wrong way, because it's a turnbuckle and it can go forward or backwards, and I always by default do it backwards. So yeah, I'm gonna do that, and maybe put some wheels on this thing. So that was successful. I drove it for about 2.5 hours after giving it a bath. We host a color tour in the fall for our local Corvair club. And so we did the route that we normally do, or well, that we're doing for this year. And the car was flawless. I've got the throttle is sticking just a little bit. I think there's a linkage hanging up on a plug wire or something like that. So it's sticking a little bit, but then you just tap the throttle and then it comes back down to idle. So I got to play with that. Clutch is adjusted well. Everything seems to be good. I'll call this one a win. Thanks for watching. Check out my other videos. I'll put a link in the description to the video where this broke down, as well as the video where I pulled the engine. It's very detailed and gives you exact instructions on how to pull an engine out of a late model. Thanks. See you on the next one.